Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Other Record Labels. I'm your host, Scott Orr, where we talk about the art and the experience of running a record label. And a lot of these episodes that I do have some practical and some tangible suggestions and tips that you can implement on, with your label online or in physical or live events and stuff. And then sometimes we talk about some bigger picture philosophies and things that will help you improve yourself as a human being in your own life, and then in turn improves the way you run your label, which improves the livelihood of our artists. And so that's today's episode, is this big picture. I want to talk about some books that have really impacted me and that I think are really valuable for label owners to read and for DIY musicians and anyone really in the creative space. But specifically talking about labels today and some book recommendations. If you're not a reader, please don't tune out, because I really want to encourage you to take a chance on some of these books and to kind of challenge yourself to become a reader. I mean, I don't want to preach about reading. You can do that on your own time, like researching it. But I took up reading seriously back in like the late 2017. I had been a reader off and on for the past 10 or 20 years, but I really started taking it seriously and started devouring a lot of nonfiction books and creative books and business books. And I can't tell you the impact that it's had on me subconsciously and consciously. It's helped me make a lot of good decisions. I don't want to get into all of that, but I have 3 books that have completely changed my life, have completely changed how I view running a record label. And I want to share those with you today. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see them live, but I'm going to include a link in the description below in the podcast and as well, so that you can find these. And I want to say before we get into this, this is a big picture thing, and I've got lots of resources for you guys to check out. You go to otherrecordlabels.com and you can download our free guide and our checklist and a lot of cool stuff that will help you if you're starting out running a record label or if you've been running a record label for a long time. So go to otherrecordlabels.com to check that out. I want to start with, and what you might find interesting is, as I've picked 3, and I will spend some more time later on in the future and do another one of these and recommend more, because it was really hard for me to narrow down 3. But one of them is directly a book about music and about a record label. The other 2 are just more kind of ways to help you improve your life, but I think they'll really improve how you're creative. So the first one is actually about a record label, and it's called Sam Phillips. It's a Sam Phillips biography, The Man Who Invented Rock and Roll. Okay, so this is a biography about Sun Records. Sun Records is like Carl Perkins and Johnny Cash, and all of these really popular rhythm and blues and country music or hillbilly music from Memphis, back in the 50s and the 60s. And I got this because I was interested in Sun Records, and it's a very thick book. It took me a while to read, but this book is incredible because it reads like fiction. And it has a twist in the middle of it, and I won't tell you what that is, but there was I just couldn't put it down. It was such a good book. And the reason, and here's what I want you to take from it, or here's what my takeaway was. Sam Phillips was this young guy who had an affinity for recording and for music. And so he opened his own recording studio back when it wasn't very popular. And this is a guy who invented, and you'll find out some cool things, but he essentially invented tape delay, and he invented distortion by having a hole in the speaker of one of his guitar amps. And so there's some really cool backgrounds into what we know about music through this biography. But what I took away from it that I thought was really interesting was how innovative Sam was back in the day. For example, when he opened his recording studio, he wasn't getting many people coming in to record their own music. And so he ended up offering a service to record people's school graduations or church services or funeral services. He would actually offer a service where he would take his equipment, go to the funeral home, record the funeral service, and then sell a pressed record of that funeral to the family. And it's so kind of weird and morbid, but that's to me, my takeaway was, back then, owning a recording studio, and he was yet to start his record label, but it was challenging times, and working in the arts and working in the creative space was still even challenging back then, even though he was innovative and one of the first to the scene. But he took that opportunity to be innovative and to do something that was super bizarre and super creative, like recording funerals. That was my biggest takeaway was, boy, here's a guy, 50, 60, 70 years ago, who was struggling with his business to make ends meet, but wanted to stay in the music and stay in the recording field. And he branched out and did something really strange. And that helped him stay alive until Elvis Presley walked into his studio and wanted to record a song for his mom. So anyway, what I really took from this book, and this is just a really great book, tons of history about music and recording, in American music, obviously, and it's so well written. It's one of the best books I've ever read, regardless if it's about record labels or not. I encourage everyone to read it because of the history of music that you'll learn from this. But then there's these cool takeaways about how innovative and creative he was. So that's Sam Phillips. The author is Peter, Guralnick. Anyway, I should have researched that beforehand. We did an episode a couple years ago with Yep Rock, and Yep Rock curated a soundtrack for this book. So listen to that episode as well. Okay, now I'm moving on to some bigger picture, big philosophy books that I think will impact your life. And will impact the way you run a business. So if you are tuning into this hoping that I'm going to give you some music books, well, listen, there's some good music books out there. They become outdated pretty quickly, and maybe one day I'll do a little episode about that. But for now, I want to talk about books that are going to change your life, change the way that you do business, and obviously in turn change the way you run your label. This is a book from James Clear called Atomic Habits. Maybe some of you have read it. It's a bestseller. It's been out just a couple of years. I read it in early 2019, and I can tell you it was the best book I read in 2019. It is one of the best books I've ever read. This is about how do we overcome bad habits and how do we create good habits and stick to them. And there is some of the most eye-opening strategies for how to create good habits in our lives that this just incredibly changed my life. I hate saying a phrase like that because you're going to think like he's exaggerating, but this book, Atomic Habits, it was just really impactful. And it's when you learn how to kind of create self-control and how to be focused more, it really will help you when you sit down at your computer to run your label and to focus on things that matter. And so I know it may sound like I'm shoehorning why this great book can help you run a record label, but I promise you, it's stuff like this that has a greater impact on me than, say, just an actual biography about a record label or even a music industry book. And listen, if you've got those and you've read them, I've read them too. They're great. They're really helpful. Don't shy away from those. But what I want you to take away from this is that there are some big picture books that can help you change your mindset just to make you a better individual and make you a better entrepreneur and help you at running your label. So I'm sorry if this is kind of like stepping out from the creative space a little bit, but this book was really impactful. I actually brought up some quotes from it, but I left my quote notes somewhere else. But anyway, Atomic Habits, read some reviews and look into this book, and I'm telling you, it's going to change your life. Okay, speaking of change your life, now listen, I know I've said that like for the past 2 books, and I've said that for a lot of books, but this time I mean it. If every single book was going to be eliminated from my library, if I could never read any book ever again, it would be, and I could only have to pick one book. I'm getting ahead of myself. This book is called The War of Art, and I bet you that half our listeners have read this. This is from an author called Stephen Pressfield. This is an incredibly popular book. I bet you most people in the business space, in the creative space, who have read this would say this is their favorite book ever. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see how small it is. It's a very tiny book. You could read it in a day in a hammock if you wanted to. And there's a lot of kind of spin-off books that from this same concept that I have read. This book, The War of Art, which is like a play on the art of war, but this demystifies writer's block. It demystifies that creative block that we think. It really helps us kick ourselves in the pants, and it solves procrastination for me, much like the other book I mentioned, Atomic Habits. But this book is for creative people. If you are a songwriter, if you are a musician, if you run a record label, this book was so impactful for me because it really just helped me realize that the things that are that bring me down, that discourage me, that make me afraid to take chances with my label and with my music and with my business, those things are conquerable. Those things are self-imposed. They're not real. They're not real things to be afraid of. And it really helps identify how there's just this like internal resistance, this internal laziness that is holding you back. And this really speaks to creative. So I'm telling you, if you're in a band or if you're a songwriter, if you're a creative of any type, you have to read this book. It is so small. It's been around for a while, so it's super cheap. I think you could probably get it for $10. I would buy tons of copies. I've bought some for my artists. If you're on a record label, if you read a book like this and it's cheap, buy a couple of copies for some of your artists on the label who you think would be impacted by this. If you could only read one book that I'm recommending today, and I want to do another episode because there's some other books I want to tell you about, but there's only one book you're ever going to read for the rest of your life, make sure it's this one, The War of Art. I'm not the first person to say that. You can Google the name and you're going to read tons of reviews. After you read it, please email me and tell me how it's impacted you. I wrote down tons of little quotes. This has helped me not be so precious. This has helped me be more prolific in writing as a writer, but with my label, it's helped me just stay focused and this is very similar to Atomic Habits, where when you're a creative and that today you have to go to your desk and do some tasks, there's this internal voice that's saying, not today, you don't feel like doing it. There's something that's just kind of pulling you back. I've kind of trained myself. Now, I recognize when I'm burnt out, but I've kind of trained myself. Just ignore that and just go up and start doing one thing. Just open the file. Just open the email and just say hello. If it's a bio you have to write, just write the first sentence. It's this book here, The War of Art and Atomic Habits, that have really helped me be more productive. I know these are kind of gross terms, and I don't want to go down that road, but I found that it's really helped me stay focused in creating art, and it's kind of demystified a lot of the creative process. So I hope you found these helpful, and I'll include some links in the description below. If you have a book that has kind of impacted how you have run your label, or you are creative as an artist, or just a book that you think other people need to know about, please email me, podcast@otherrecordlabels.com, or you can leave a description if you're watching this on YouTube. Speaking of which, if you leave a review on iTunes, that can really help out, and you could even make some mentions about things that you found helpful in there. So please do that, and go to otherrecordlabels.com to find some resources to help you. So I hope you found this helpful. Thank you so much.